I slapped the Mafia boss in front of 200 dinner guests, and the sniper's bullet passed through the space where his head had been. For 1 second, the entire restaurant went silent. Then Don Marco Bellini touched the red mark on his cheek and said, "Nobody harms the waitress. She just saved my life. My name is Emma Reed. I was a chubby waitress at La Scala, a waterfront restaurant where wealthy men tipped poorly and discussed crimes as if servers were furniture. Marco Bellini had reserved the entire dining room for his father's birthday. His family occupied the center table beneath glass windows, facing the harbor. I carried champagne when I noticed a tiny red dot moving across Marco's collar. My late husband had served in the military and taught me never to stare at a laser. I dropped the tray, crossed the floor, and slapped Marco hard enough to turn his face. The window shattered. A bullet buried itself in the birthday cake. Guards drew weapons. Guests screamed. Marco pulled me behind the stone bar while his men sealed the room. "Why a slap?" he asked. "You were facing the wrong direction for a polite push. You have a strong hand. You have a living head." Security Chief Nolan Price accused me of signaling the shooter. My fingerprints were on the champagne bottle, the window table, and Marco's jacket. "She works here," Marco said. "Her fingerprints are supposed to exist." The sniper escaped from a warehouse across the water, but police found a server uniform and a photograph of me in the nest. Someone planned to frame the plus-size waitress everyone had seen strike the boss. Restaurant manager Paul Decker told investigators, "I resented Marco because the Bellini family intended to buy the building and dismiss staff. That was news to me." Marco denied any purchase. His father Vittorio remained strangely calm. "The girl has brought trouble," the old man said. "Remove her." Marco refused and placed me under protection. I hated the phrase. Protection meant 2 armed men outside my apartment and co-workers treating me like a criminal. I demanded to join the investigation because the restaurant details came from someone who knew service routines. At the sniper nest, I found a grease pencil mark used by La Scala kitchen staff to label allergy orders. The color belonged to pastry chef Daniel Price, Nolan's younger brother. Daniel disappeared after the shooting. Nolan claimed he had been kidnapped. I noticed Nolan wore the same harbor mud on his shoes as the sniper nest. Marco noticed me noticing. We gave Nolan false information that I remembered the shooter's face and would identify him at a private dinner. That evening, Daniel broke into my apartment carrying a gun. He was terrified, not violent. Nolan had forced him to prepare the sniper position by threatening their mother. The real shooter was hired by Vittorio Bellini. Marco's father believed his son planned to hand legitimate companies to outside auditors, weakening family control. The birthday dinner placed Marco beneath a predictable window. Vittorio intended to inherit sympathy and blame me, a replaceable waitress with a staged grievance. "Why would Nolan betray his boss for your father?" I asked Marco. "My father paid his family's debts and made gratitude into a leash. We needed proof stronger than Daniel's word. The damaged birthday cake contained the bullet. Vittorio ordered it destroyed before police analysis. I had moved it into the restaurant freezer because nobody told the waitstaff evidence belonged elsewhere. The bullet's rifling matched a ceremonial rifle, registered to Vittorio's private collection. Its storage log carried Nolan's signature and Vittorio's authorization. At the family council, Vittorio laughed when I presented it. "You expect captains to believe a fat waitress over me," Marco stood. "No. I expect them to believe the weapon, the signature, and the son you threatened." Nolan drew his gun. I threw a metal serving tray into his wrist. The weapon fired into the ceiling. Marco's guards restrained him. Vittorio reached for a hidden pistol beneath his chair. But his own birthday guests moved away, leaving him alone at the table. Marco handed him to police with the rifle logs and financial records. Nolan and Vittorio were convicted. Daniel entered witness protection with his mother. La Scala employees bought a share of the restaurant after Marco discovered his father had secretly acquired its debt. I became dining room operations manager, not because I saved Marco, but because the staff elected me. Our relationship grew slowly. He returned to the restaurant alone, sat away from windows, and always tipped exactly 20% until I told him generosity should not require mathematical fear. On our first date, he asked whether I regretted slapping him, only that I used my right hand. My wrist hurt for 2 days. My cheek hurt longer. A moving story. Months later at another family dinner, an uncle joked that Marco obeyed the waitress who hit him. Marco answered, "I listened to the woman who noticed the danger every trained guard missed." I corrected him afterward. The dishwasher noticed the unfamiliar uniform. Daniel left the grease mark. "I only saw the laser," Marco nodded. "Then we honor all 3. The restaurant created an employee safety award and a confidential reporting system. The first person to receive it was a busboy who stopped a gas leak. No gunfire, no mafia drama, just a 16-year-old who smelled something wrong. That was the kind of rescue I preferred. The night I slapped Marco Bellini, everyone believed I had lost my mind because a chubby waitress was not supposed to touch a powerful man. His reaction silenced the room, not because he punished me, but because he recognized that dignity mattered less than survival. The bullet missed him by inches. The truth struck his family much harder. 4 years after the bullet passed through Marco's birthday cake, La Scala no longer belonged to one family. Cooks, servers, dishwashers, and managers owned 60% through an employee trust. Marco retained a minority share with no authority over hiring. I served as elected operations director and still worked 1 dinner shift each week because spreadsheets cannot tell you when a dining room feels wrong. Marco and I married in the closed restaurant with Daniel and his mother watching through a protected video link. We built a life based on one rule: noticing danger did not entitle either of us to control the other. Then, a woman collapsed at table 12 after taking 1 sip of water, and every guest received a text saying I had poisoned her. Her name was Judge Amelia Cross. She was scheduled to rule the next morning on whether the Bellini Shipping Company could become fully employee-owned. The message contained a photograph of me standing beside the water station and a sentence: "She slapped a king to take his crown." Security locked the doors. Staff stared at their phones. Marco moved toward Amelia, but I ordered everyone away from the table. Her lips were blue, her pulse slow, and a chemical smell clung to the rim of her glass. The restaurant medic used naloxone while I gave emergency dispatch the exact timeline. Amelia began breathing before the ambulance arrived. Police found a concentrated opioid inside her water pitcher. Only my fingerprints were on the handle because I had moved it during setup. A hidden camera clip showed me pouring from a small vial. The woman in the video wore my uniform, my body shape, and my hair. Her face never turned. Nolan Price was in prison, Vittorio was dead, and the old conspiracy should have ended. Yet someone had studied the first attack closely enough to rebuild its logic frame, the Chubby Waitress, whose ordinary access made evidence easy. Marco wanted to clear the restaurant and take me home. I refused. The attacker chose a public room because they want a public reaction. Your reaction can happen behind guards. Then the story becomes that you hid me. I surrendered my keys and phone to detectives, stepped aside from operations, and asked the employee board to appoint kitchen manager Rosa Alvarez as interim director. The board did so without Marco voting. That mattered. Bidam. Inspectors found 3 more contaminated water bottles in a sealed delivery case. The case carried a supplier code belonging to Bellini Shipping. Judge Cross's hearing was suspended. News reports claimed Marco poisoned her to stop scrutiny of the employee transfer, while others claimed I acted to help workers seize the company. The attack divided every group that reform had brought together. Union drivers refused Bellini cargo. Family captains threatened to reclaim legitimate businesses before courts froze them. Restaurant employees questioned whether our trust had made them targets. I could not tell them loyalty should replace fear. We opened the records. The water shipment arrived through Pier 9 at 5:42 that morning. Digital logs showed Marco personally authorizing it. He had been asleep beside me. His biometric signature was copied from an old family device, supposedly destroyed after Vittorio's arrest. Only 3 people had access then: Nolan Vittorio and Marco's younger cousin, Gabriele Bellini. Gabriel was 16 during the first shooting. He had since become chief technology officer of the shipping company and the loudest supporter of employee ownership. He also loved Amelia Cross, though they kept the relationship private to avoid questions about her hearing. The poison could kill the judge and make Gabriel appear betrayed by both family and workers. When we called him, he had disappeared. His car was found near the harbor with blood on the driver's seat and my old server apron in the trunk. Marco believed Gabriel had been taken. Detective Lena Ortiz believed he fled. I believe the apron was the useful detail. It had been stored in the La Scala archive beside the shattered birthday plate. Only employees and documentary researchers entered that room. 2 weeks earlier, a production company called True City Films had interviewed us for a program about restaurant heroes. I disliked the title and refused to reenact the slap. Their crew measured every camera angle, copied old footage, and asked staff to wear period uniforms. The director, Simon Vale, had once worked as a media advisor for Vittorio. His public records hid it behind a different surname. The documentary was not recording our history. It was collecting materials to recreate a crime. We searched the archive inventory and found one object added by the crew, a replacement birthday plate painted to look shattered. Beneath the glaze was a thin tracking circuit. It transmitted audio from board meetings held upstairs. Someone had heard Gabriel and Amelia discuss a protected whistleblower from Pier 9. That whistleblower knew a criminal cargo network continued operating inside employee-bound shipping routes. The poison attack aimed to stop the hearing and locate the witness. Rosa remembered Simon spending 20 minutes alone with busboy Malik Turner, who worked nights at the restaurant and days loading water at Pier 9. Malik was the whistleblower. He had not reported for either shift. Marco assembled armed men. Detective Ortiz warned that any family operation would frighten witnesses and compromise evidence. Marco looked at me. 4 years earlier, he might have thanked her and done what he wanted. This time he asked, "What can we do without entering your case?" Ortiz assigned his drivers to review public harbor traffic and requested restaurant staff provide schedules voluntarily. Power changed most clearly in moments when it accepted a boundary. I studied the fake video of the woman pouring poison. The server tied her apron in front. La Scala staff tied in back because front knots caught tray edges. Documentary actors tied in front. Her shoes had non-slip soles from our approved supplier, but the pattern was reversed, as if the video had been mirrored. Simon did that to make a service door appear on the correct side. In the original orientation, the background was not La Scala. It was a replica set. True City Films rented a warehouse across from Pier 9. Police obtained a warrant. Inside, they found the restaurant copy, poisoned bottles, costumes, and editing files. Simon, Gabriel, and Malik were gone. A live monitor showed a waterfront charity banquet scheduled that night aboard the Bellini-owned museum ship. The event would host union leaders, judges, family executives, and the employee board. Simon planned another broadcast. Canceling would scatter targets and let him claim we feared exposure. Holding it risked lives. Amelia woke in the hospital and asked to speak to me. Her voice was weak, but her mind was clear. She said Gabriel had uncovered shipping containers labeled as emergency water that actually carried unregistered weapons components. The route belonged to an old partnership between Vittorio and a financier named Conrad Vale, Simon's father. When Vittorio died, Conrad expected Marco to honor the deal. Employee ownership would place manifests under independent review and destroy the network. Conrad used Simon's cameras to collect blackmail, direct public narratives, and frame anyone who resisted. Gabriel moved Malik into hiding. Amelia believed he staged his own bloody car to draw Conrad away from the witness, but then stopped communicating. Her last message from him contained only 3 words: "Check the gratuity." La Scala's point-of-sale system had processed a series of enormous tips from anonymous banquet reservations. The amounts looked random until I treated them as table numbers and menu items. Gabriel used the restaurant code because he knew Simon monitored his phone but dismissed service data. The sequence spelled engine room, 3 museum ship, Gabriel and Malik were being held aboard the vessel where the banquet would occur. We gave the code to Ortiz. She prepared a covert rescue before guests boarded. When officers opened Engine Room 3, they found Gabriel's jacket, Malik's work badge, and a speaker playing a heartbeat. The room was bait. The real captives were already among the catering staff, forced into uniforms and fitted with explosive vests hidden beneath chef coats. Simon had learned from the first shooting that guards search guests, not servers. Once again, service work was the blind spot. I entered the preparation area as a consultant because every staff member needed verification. Marco objected once, then accepted my decision after Ortiz approved it. We used a simple test that no stolen credential could pass. Each employee described the heaviest safe tray they could carry and the route they used around a left-handed server. Outsiders laughed at the question. Workers answered without hesitation. 2 counterfeit servers were arrested. Malik stood near the dessert station, pale and sweating. He tapped his thumb against his tray in groups of 4, our emergency signal for forced compliance. Gabriel worked beside him wearing a high collar. Simon watched through cameras, ready to trigger the devices if anyone approached. I took a tray of champagne and moved into the banquet hall. Conrad Vale stood on stage announcing a surprise film about corruption within Bellini businesses. The screen showed edited footage of Marco threatening workers, me handling poisoned water, and Gabriel transferring cargo. Guests began shouting. Union representatives moved toward exits, but electronic locks engaged. Conrad accused the employee trust of becoming a criminal shield. "This is what happens when waitresses and drivers believe ownership makes them qualified to rule," he said. I stepped onto the stage and slapped him. The sound silenced the hall. No bullet followed. Conrad touched his cheek, stunned. "Why do you people keep mistaking a slap for the story?" I asked. His attention remained on me while Rosa cut the ballroom feed from the service panel. Without live cameras, Simon could not see Malik or Gabriel. Ortiz's team removed their vests and replaced the trigger receivers with dummy lights. Marco did not rush the stage. He moved table by table, telling guests the exits would open after a bomb check. Calm prevented the stampede Conrad expected. I told Conrad the video of me had been mirrored and the poisoned bottles traced to his warehouse. He smiled. "A waitress's opinion." Judge Amelia's voice came through the hall speakers from her hospital room. She confirmed Gabriel reported the weapons route before the attack. Port investigators displayed verified manifests on the screen. Rosa showed financial transfers from Conrad's charity into True City Films. Malik's pre-recorded testimony identified the containers. Evidence rose in layers, each from someone with legitimate access. Conrad reached for the trigger inside his jacket. Simon activated his own device from the projection booth. The dummy lights flashed harmlessly. Gabriel removed his chef coat and placed the disabled vest on stage. "You trained everyone to look at the boss," he told Conrad. "That is why you never noticed the workers changing the room around you." Simon ran through the upper corridor. I saw a red laser dot move across Marco's chest. This time it came from a prop rifle Simon had positioned behind the balcony curtain. I did not slap Marco. I dropped the heavy champagne tray onto the ship's brass emergency pedal. Steel fire curtains fell between the balcony and hall. The shot struck a curtain plate. Officers arrested Simon before he reached the deck. Conrad tried to take Amelia's assistant hostage but was stopped by 3 banquet servers using a linen cart. He and Simon were charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, extortion weapons, trafficking, and conspiracy. Their recordings exposed public officials who had accepted cargo payments. The shipping hearing resumed after an independent judge took over. Amelia recused herself because of Gabriel, not because anyone doubted her courage. Employee ownership was approved with strict external audits. Gabriel resigned as technology chief while investigators reviewed how counterfeit credentials bypassed his controls. Supporting reform did not erase responsibility for weak systems. He later returned through an open hiring process to lead security training under the authority of drivers and dock workers. Malik entered witness protection temporarily, then chose to testify publicly. He used his compensation to study logistics compliance. La Scala remained closed for 6 weeks. Some customers expected a grand reopening centered on Marco and me. Instead, the employee board held a safety night, honoring the workers who identified the false staff and removed the devices. The brass emergency pedal from the museum ship was installed beside the restaurant's shattered birthday plate. My old apron went into evidence and never returned. I was glad. Not every painful object needs to become decoration. I resumed operations only after the board re-elected me. At my first shift back, a guest asked for the table where I slapped Marco. I seated him somewhere else. "History is not a reservation category," I said. Marco laughed from the bar. He had learned to visit without bringing guards into the dining room, though 2 remained outside, pretending badly to admire boats. Our marriage survived the second attack because he did not turn fear into permission. That did not mean he felt no fear. One night I found him measuring the distance between our apartment windows and the nearest rooftop. I sat beside him. "You can check," I said. "You cannot make me stop working." "I know. You can say you hate it. I hate it." "Good. Now we are discussing feelings instead of issuing orders." He looked offended by the vocabulary, which was progress. The employee trust later purchased Marco's remaining restaurant shares. He signed at table 12 and paid for dinner like any customer. When the transfer completed, he asked whether losing ownership meant he could finally receive special treatment. Rosa handed him a stack of dirty menus. "Yes. You may wipe these." He did. The old Bellini captains considered his surrender humiliating. Yet, legitimate shipping profits increased when workers gained authority to stop suspicious cargo. Insurance costs fell. Accidents declined. The family's criminal influence weakened because fewer people depended on secret favors. Marco stopped calling it his empire. He called it the business, then eventually the cooperative. Language did not create change by itself, but it revealed which habits were dying. Judge Cross and Gabriel married 2 years later, after her role in Bellini cases ended. Their wedding used no private water shipment. Malik inspected every bottle anyway. Daniel sent a pastry recipe through his attorney and insisted the cake be placed far from windows. Nobody found that funny except me. On the 10th anniversary of the sniper attack, a journalist asked Marco what he felt when a chubby waitress struck him before 200 guests. "Embarrassed," he said. The journalist looked disappointed, then grateful, then ashamed that embarrassment arrived before gratitude. That was the most honest answer he ever gave. People are trained to protect status even when status places their head in a rifle sight. I had not been fearless. I was terrified from the moment I saw the red dot. My hand moved because danger allowed no time to request permission. Courage was useful for 1 second. Everything after required evidence rules people, and the humility to admit one dramatic rescue had not made us impossible to fool again. Years later, I retired from La Scala and trained restaurant workers in emergency observation. I never taught them to attack customers or imagine every reflection was a sniper. I taught them to trust specific details: an unfamiliar knot, a reversed door, a tray carried against the room's flow, a guest whose breathing changed after 1 sip. I taught managers that reports must not depend on whether the worker looked important. A 16-year-old busser could smell a gas leak. A dishwasher could recognize a copied uniform. A curvy waitress could see a laser before armed men did. The course became standard across the waterfront. Its logo was not a slap or a bullet. It was an open eye above a serving tray. Marco attended the final class and sat in the back. A trainee asked whether he was the Mafia boss from my story. He answered, "I am the man who was standing in the wrong place." That was close enough. At home, we still disagreed about tipping. He preferred numbers. I preferred generosity guided by attention. We compromised by letting the server decide whether his calculation looked sincere. Once a young waitress recognized us and nervously dropped a tray. Marco helped pick up the glasses. She apologized to him 3 times and to me once. I said, "He owns nothing here. You may distribute apologies equally." She laughed and relaxed. That small moment meant more than any council bow. The world that created Vittorio and Conrad survived by teaching workers that powerful men deserved perfect service, while workers deserved suspicion. La Scala became safer when we reversed that assumption. The night I slapped Marco, his reaction silenced a restaurant. The years after mattered more. He learned that gratitude was not protection if it became control, that love did not turn my judgment into his property, and that the people carrying water through a room often understood its dangers better than those seated at the center table. I learned that being right once did not excuse me from being questioned later. Between us, we stopped treating rescue as a debt. The bullet missed his head. The harder target was the belief that power should always be served before it listened. The belief did not disappear quietly. After Marco's criminal organization dissolved, several younger captains formed a private club called the Old Table. They claimed employee ownership had humiliated the Bellini name and turned loyal men into clerks. At first, they did nothing illegal. They held dinners, posted photographs of Vittorio, and told stories about a time when respect arrived before questions. Then restaurant workers across the harbor began receiving anonymous messages showing their children's schools and partners' addresses. No demand accompanied the photographs. Fear was the demand. La Scala's board debated whether to hire armed protection. Younger employees wanted visible guards. Older workers remembered how family security once watched them more closely than guests. I proposed a different plan: shared transportation after night shifts, confidential reporting, exterior lighting, and cooperation with the Waterfront Labor Council. Marco offered money without conditions and did not attend the vote. The plan passed. 2 weeks later, someone threw a brick through our front window. Wrapped around it was a copy of the first newspaper photograph showing my slap. Across my face, someone had written, "Know your place." I kept the brick, but threw away the photograph. "Why keep one and not the other?" Marco asked. "The brick has fingerprints. The insult has nothing new." Laboratory testing found traces of red wine and rare cigar ash. The Old Table met at a private cellar supplying the same wine and cigars. That clue justified surveillance, but not arrests. Detective Ortiz warned us not to confront them. I agreed. Marco agreed more slowly. The club announced a memorial dinner for Vittorio aboard a renovated ferry and invited former Bellini workers. Hidden in the invitation was a loyalty pledge, transferring any future whistleblower claims to the club's private arbitrator. Signing would silence employees who had not understood the legal language. Rosa and Malik attended with counsel, recorded the explanation, and refused. The club president, a former captain named Enzo Palladino, laughed at the idea that servers needed lawyers to eat dinner. "Everyone needs a lawyer when the menu contains a contract," Rosa answered. Enzo ordered them removed. Outside, masked men attacked their car. Shared transport drivers activated alarms and blocked the exit until police arrived. One attacker carried glass fragments from La Scala's window in his pocket as a trophy. He accepted a plea and identified Enzo. The Old Table was not preserving heritage. It was rebuilding coercion through employment agencies, arbitration clauses, and intimidation that looked too small for headlines. Investigators found a list of 30 workers marked obedient, doubtful, or infected. My name stood beside the word source. Marco's beside lost. Enzo had reduced an entire social change to one woman corrupting one man. It comforted him to believe power fell because of romance instead of hundreds of people choosing not to obey. At trial, his attorney displayed photographs of Marco and me together and argued employees followed me because they feared my husband. The board members testified about every time they overruled us. Rosa described suspending me during the poisoning investigation. Malik described rejecting Marco's preferred security contractor. The defense had tried to prove control and instead documented its absence. Enzo was convicted of conspiracy, intimidation, assault, and labor fraud. The civil settlement funded night transportation for waterfront workers, including businesses unrelated to Bellini history. No building carried our names. The final old table dinner occurred years later, when 6 former captains asked Marco to meet and discuss reconciliation. He chose La Scala, now entirely employee-owned, and made a reservation through the public system. I was not present. That was his conversation, not a test he needed me to pass. He returned home after midnight and said they wanted forgiveness for believing obedience and loyalty were the same. What did you tell them? I told them forgiveness is personal. Access is governed by policy. I kissed him because it was a good answer, and because he had once believed policy was an obstacle used by weaker men. Time softened him without making him harmless. He remained capable of frightening silence when angry, but he learned to notice that silence and start again. Time softened me too. I stopped treating every offer of help as an attempt at control. I learned to say yes when tired, and no when help arrived with decisions already attached. We were never the simple couple strangers wanted ruthless boss and warm woman danger and tenderness, power and curves. We were 2 adults, revising habits that had once kept us alive and later threatened to keep us alone. On our 25th anniversary, La Scala seated us near the harbor windows. Marco asked for another table. I reminded him the reinforced glass had passed inspection. He sat uncomfortable but willing. A red reflection crossed his collar when a boat turned outside. My hand lifted instinctively. He ducked before I touched him. The server stared. Then we both laughed so loudly the dining room fell quiet. Old reflex, I explained. The server nodded and brought dessert far from the edge of the table. The cake contained no bullets. Marco still checked. I still teased him. Survival leaves habits that deserve patience even after danger ends. When I died many years after him, La Scala closed for one evening. The employees placed no statue outside. They set an empty serving tray on table 12 beside a glass of clean water. The next morning, they reopened on schedule. A new waitress noticed one bottle had a broken seal and removed the entire case before service. She had never met me. She did not know the anniversary. She simply followed the reporting system and trusted that management would listen. That action was the conclusion I would have chosen. Not a slap repeated forever. Not a Mafia legend polished for tourists. Just a worker seeing a small wrong thing, speaking without fear, and preventing a danger before the room needed to become silent.